Today, the Democratic field of 2020 candidates shrunk by one as Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton ended his presidential campaign. Moulton's the fourth candidate to drop out so far, following Swalwell, Hickenlooper, and Inslee. Well, many of the remaining candidates spent the day campaigning at a Democratic summer meeting out in San Francisco. Former Congressman Beto O'Rourke, however, was in Texas with former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who was severely wounded in a mass shooting in Tucson in 2011. Visiting with victims today of the recent mass shooting in El Paso, of course. There they are in the hospital. In an interview with the New York Times last week, O'Rourke said he would detach his travel from the primary calendar and plan his political activities around confronting Mr. Trump in direct and personal terms. Here he was today on the importance of connecting Trump's rhetoric to hate crimes.
If I don't connect the dots, then I am in part culpable for the next mass shooting animated by the president's racism. So we've got to call that out. And we've got to make those connections clear to our fellow Americans who themselves may have not understood how the president's rhetoric, his language, his laughter when somebody at one of his rallies says, shoot them, when talking about how we stop the invasion he's been warning us of when it comes to immigrants in this country.
Well, the president's been all over the place on gun control, of course, promising action on background checks right after the shootings in El Paso and Dayton, only to later retreat on that promise. Well, earlier this week, he seemed more focused on whether or not the El Paso victims liked him than what they wanted from him on gun control.
I did. I went to the hospitals. I will tell you this. I went to the hospitals. It was totally falsely reported. And frankly, you want to know the truth? They love their president. And nobody wrote that. Nobody wrote that because you didn't write the truth. New York Times doesn't like to write the truth.
Sir, what?
But they totally love our country, and they do love our president. It's like nobody would meet with me. Not only did they meet with me, they were pouring out of the room.
Well, last night, Trump tweeted, I am hopeful Congress will engage with my team to pass meaningful legislation that will make a real difference and, most importantly, save lives. I'm joined now by former Texas Congressman and presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke. Beto, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And let's talk about what you've been saying. You said that the president's words have animated this violence. Explain the connection between words and shooting people.
When he was making his case to the country, announcing his candidacy for the presidency, he talks about Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, repeatedly warned of invasions from Mexico and Central America, called asylum seekers animals, called them killers, called them predators, put their children in cages, deported their parents back to the very countries from which they fled. And you talked about this a little bit in the run-up to this interview at that rally in May in Florida when he's warning of this invasion and he says, how do we stop these people? Someone yells out, shoot them. Yeah. And the crowd roars their approval and he smiles. He says, this is okay. And in the face of gun violence that has claimed 40,000 lives just in the last year, he's done nothing. He's complicit, actually corrupted by the NRA. So he's driving a lot of this violence. And I want to make clear, racism in America did not start with Donald Trump, but he's given it new life. He's welcomed it into the open. And along with that, the violence that drove somebody literally 600 miles from Allen, Texas to El Paso to kill 22 people in this city. So we've got to connect those dots or we're not going to stop the next mass shooting or the next act of domestic terrorism inspired by white supremacy.
What do you think he's up to when he does this? Because the president's not stupid. He knows how words work. He knows how to rev up a crowd. When he says, hit him on the way out, remember that? He'd do that to any protester. He'd yell at the people, rough them up. You know, the police, he says, don't worry about banging their heads on the roof of the car when you put them in the squad car. He almost prescribes violence.
Yeah. I mean, part of the genius of this country is more or less we were able to resolve our differences peacefully, democratically. I got a lot of hell for going to his inauguration in 2017. And I said, I go not to celebrate the man, but the fact that we can still pull this off more than 240 years later. And yet he's going to fundamentally destroy this ability for us to disagree in an agreeable manner, inviting that violence, telling people of color to go back to their own country, though they were born here, though they're U.S. citizens in America. The day he signs his ban on Muslim travel to the U.S., the mosque in Victoria, Texas, burned to the ground. Gunman walks into the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, raving about caravans financed by wealthy Jewish Americans. The President of the United States raving about caravans, and when asked if George Soros is funding them, says, you know, who knows, maybe he is. So you're right, this guy knows exactly what he's doing. What he's doing is ripping apart an already divided country and inviting violence into our politics and into our communities. Latinos here in El Paso, throughout America, now feel like they have a target on their back, in large part thanks to Donald Trump.
Let's talk about your fight in the primary. You're moved up a bit. You're getting a little breaking from the lower pack. You're in a category of your own, really, I think, in the sort of the third tier. You may not like to hear it, but you are moving up. And my question is this. If this all ends at the end of next May, and the Democrat, because Seth Moulton just dropped out of the race and said he's fearful this will happen, and the Democratic Party picks a nominee that appears, where they are not, very far left, and the American electorate, which is generally centrist, has to choose between Trump, who is awful to a lot of people, and someone they're very much afraid of because they're so far left. Do you worry about that? Like Seth Moulton was worried when he quit the race today.
Chris, I'm so focused on being that nominee, on being able to carry Texas and its 38 electoral college votes, revving up not just Democrats, but bring in independents and Republicans as well, who no longer have a home in the party of Donald Trump, much the way we did in Texas.
If you get the nomination, will you carry
Absolutely.
Texas? Beto O'Rourke,
Absolutely.
thank you for...
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.